Space Marines, poster boys of the Warhammer 40,000 franchise, are clad in some of the most iconic, badass suits of futuristic armor in all of science fiction. Unfortunately, the unassuming Space Marine miniature is one of the most frustrating and deceptively complicated miniatures you could paint. But it doesn't have to be that way. You know what? The humble Space Marine is such an impressive aesthetic design because of its streamlined, simplistic approach to shapes. The power armor and helmets aren't over-designed like we see ad nauseum in sci-fi futuristic suits and armor. And it's probably because of that streamlined, elegant design that it's so iconic and immediately recognizable. But you didn't think I was going to wax poetic for 20 minutes about Space Marines, now did you? No, it's because of this simplistic design that these models are so deceptively complicated and frustrating to paint, especially in a limited amount of time. But today we're going to attempt to crack that nut as I bust open this Kill Team Dead Silence box and paint a Space Wolf from within, and show you both the good and the bad of painting Space Marines and how we can conquer those challenges. Now, the first thing we need to talk about are shapes, and the very basic, simplistic shapes that make up a Space Marine. Pretty much every surface on that armor is either a cylinder or part of a sphere. Entirely smooth, rounded objects can be incredibly difficult to paint, especially when they're lined up against each other with just a hairline crack that differentiates them. And these sharp lines where each shape meets another can be very difficult to make look as clean as the box art shows. Contrast the Space Marines armor to just about any other model that we paint. They usually have textured shapes like fur, or highly detailed materials like guns, or organic shapes like a tyrannid's body, or the shapes of human flesh and skin. Moral of the story is more complex shapes are easier to paint because there's more noise going on there and we can make more mistakes and not let them be seen. There is nowhere to hide in any mistake you make on a Space Marine's armor. Now, of course, we can always hide the imperfections of these perfect shapes on a Space Marine's armor with texture, with our paintbrush, and battle damage, but I often found I got frustrated because that's not how the box art painted them, and it doesn't look the way I want it to, especially when I'm brand new to miniature painting. So while they've designed one of the coolest looking sets of science fiction armor we've ever seen, they've actually made our lives incredibly difficult to paint these little bastards. I should also make it clear that I'm not just here to shit on Space Marines today. There's a lot of things about a Space Marine that are very valuable and fun to paint, and we're going to identify those as well. First, starting off with color. Now, every Space Marine chapter is largely a single color, and that means when we jump into the painting process, getting down our base coat across the entire model is pretty quick and painless. The most important part of starting any miniature paint job, Space Marines included, is ensuring that you have full opaque coverage over the main colors of your model, because there's nowhere to hide the mistakes of sloppy paint jobs later on. Now, don't stress about painting in the lines here. All of these details, and even exposed head or whatever else you accidentally paint, isn't important. What really matters is we get that full opaque coverage. So that means 3 thin coats of our base color should be applied to every section of the armor. Now, through that first step of just base coating the armor, we haven't had to confront the pitfalls ahead in painting a Space Marine, but that's all about to change when we start to add some depth of color to this armor itself. Now, we're painting 3-dimensional objects here, and it's important to put some light and shadow on them to really make them feel like they're just tiny versions of real armored Space Marines, which means we need to add some shadows. Now, unfortunately, the out-of-the-bottle shadows that you have access to in shades or contrast paints are actually terrible on Space Marines, and that's because of all these smooth, really rounded, hard surfaces. It's just going to form puddles in unnatural areas or pool up in places you don't want it to be, and then it'll dry and create coffee staining. So how do we add that shadow? What I found works best is just actual miniature paint, any kind of dark color that I want to use for the shadow. I thin it down with a whole bunch of water, so it still looks like the color, but it's the consistency of water. I then slop that all over the model. Again, don't put too much on in any given area so it pools up, but it will naturally go into those cracks and crevices. But because it doesn't have that retardant and that tries to slide over your model, it'll create an overall tinting while still showing the darker areas that you want to keep dark later. This is also great because you don't have to buy another product just to paint your models. You already own these paints and you're using them for something else. It's great because you have more control over this kind of an approach as well. Maybe you want a little bit more shadows underneath the armpits or behind the legs. You can just go through with another coat of this. It applies super thin anyways, so you're not going to make a drastic impact in just one coat because you've made it so thin. Just wait for a layer to dry, and if you want it more darker, more dramatic, you can add more, or just add a single wash of this dark purple over the entire armor. Now, I know what you're probably saying. I use purple for Space Wolf armor, and Space Wolves aren't purple. Well, we're going to take away some of that purple in a moment. Don't worry. But one cool part about doing your shadows this way is you can use whatever goddamn color you want to. You are the master of your own destiny. All right, you've got your base layer on. You've got your shadows in place, but now your model doesn't look anything like the faction you're trying to paint. And this is where we need to come back in and start reestablishing that color with our first layer of highlights. And for this, we just go back to whatever base color we used directly out of the bottle. This way we get an exact color match, and that tinting will have a nice smooth transition from that bit of purple in the shadows up to the pure rust gray for our Space Wolves armor. And at this point, we once again run into a big pain point of painting Space Marines compared to other models. We've got these perfectly rounded geometric shapes that make most of the armor up outside of some of the shapes on the backpack. These are inherently much more difficult for us to base coat up and highlight up. Really, the only important thing to worry about is make sure that the upward facing surfaces of your Space Marines armor are getting that true base color back in it. If they're more downward facing or they're hard to reach because they're underneath the armpits or whatever, don't touch them at all. The big trick is that your brushstroke starts down in the shadowed areas and it ends up in the highlighted areas. This is because your paintbrush will always deposit more of its pigments at the end of its stroke. So always start in shadow and end in the brightest areas. If you continually do this across all the shapes of whatever you're painting, it will make it feel like the top area is being lit compared to the bottom area of your model. I find my brain sometimes hurts when I start to think too much about the geometry of Space Marines armor, and it can kind of make you overwhelmed if you do that too much. So just try not to think too hard here. Instead, just focus on reestablishing the chapter color for your armor and doing your best to avoid all of those cracks and recesses where armor panels meet, so we can show that cool differentiation that really makes Space Marine armor stand out. Our next step is another massive pain point for painting Space Marines, probably the largest one, and that is their reliance on painting edge highlights to make them look good. You see, the downside of all their armor being one color is that we need to visually differentiate the different panels, the little vents. The fact that everything is the same color means that we need to differentiate each of these planes and shapes with a crisp, clean edge highlight. And for that, we're going to want to use a brighter color than our base tone so they really pop out at this miniature scale. Now, edge highlighting is one of those tricky things because it requires a level of precision and skill with your paintbrush that when you're newer, we just don't have a lot of yet. The good news is how you build that skill and how you get better is just through repetition, just by doing more and more of it. And I can hear some of you saying, John, isn't it important to edge highlight all models? Well, yes and no, actually. Different kinds of models, the more details they have, the more organic shapes they have, the less they rely on edge highlighting for the eye to really pick up all the important details. With Space Marines, everything is rounded. There's so few edges outside of where the panels meet. So if you don't do this step, they just look like a giant green blob at arm's length unless you do this step. Now, the good news is because these models are largely comprised of a single color, that is their power armor color, that means that we really can focus all of our attention on details for this model just on the armor. Most of the other stuff we're going to paint later does not matter. It's the make or break part of a Space Marine. And you want to be holding your paintbrush in the same position no matter where you're painting, making the same back and forth stroke to create the edge highlight. What you move is actually the model, not your brush, because you're going to have an ideal position in making this stroke where you have the most control. You can move the model around so you can simply keep going back and forth and hitting the correct angle you need to get that clean, crisp edge highlight. Once we finish painting up our Space Marine armor, I've got great news. One of the best things about painting Space Marines is they're very front-loaded in the effort to paint them. All the other details on this model, the pouches, the belts, all that crap, it kind of doesn't matter. What really makes a Space Marine is in the armor itself. First off, every Space Marine's got a bunch of black tubes and stuff that's underneath their armor that's peeking out. All that bullshit, just paint it black. You can use a black paint, a contrast paint, whatever. I'm not even gonna highlight these things. I'm just gonna paint them black and move on. And by the end of this video, you can let me know if you can even tell if they were just painted black or they had any other work done to them. Spoiler, you're not even gonna notice these parts. Hey, get off your couch and come on down to Into the AM. We ain't got deals, we got steals. Boom. Everybody's gotta wear clothes, but not all clothes are created equal. We got style, we got comfort, we got the highest quality fabrics, and at a price that'll make your wallet cry. No wait, your wallet won't cry. It won't cry. Because the prices are low. And I know what you're thinking, can't get any better than this. But wait, there's more. We have our greatest deal of the year going on right now. But there's a catch. You must act now. You see, our stock is limited, and once these sales are gone, they're gone for the year. Now, if you know Into the AM, you know their basic tees and graphic tees are the bread and butter. But it goes way beyond that, my friends. We got everything you need for all seasons, whether you need the long sleeve tee, the flannel, the hoodie, the zip-up hoodie. We got pull-ups, we got button-ups, we got custom pieces like the Sierra shirt coat. You are not gonna wanna miss it. But what about my bottom halves? I'm glad you asked. We got sweats, we got jeans, we even got boxer briefs. It is prime holiday shopping season, so why not stretch your dollar a little further down at Into the AM to all the people you love in your life. You can get them primo quality clothing at the best prices of the year, and you'll save so much money you can get a little something for yourself. See? Now you're gonna say I'm crazy, and maybe I'm crazy, but it's gonna get even better than that. You use my link below and code NINJON at checkout, and you'll get an additional 10% off your entire order, even on those sale prices. Thanks, Into the AM. Now let's get back to the video. Next up, belts, pouches, holsters. I call this the brown bullshit. Stuff that we just paint brown or gray or whatever. And the key here is you just pick one, maybe two neutral colors. Could be browns, tans, grays, whatever. And you use that same color across all of these materials. Because these things aren't important, we don't want them to be a wild color that clashes with our Space Marine's armor. Instead, we just want to pick one color, maybe two, and rush through these steps with just simple base coats. From there, I'm just thinning down my favorite paint on the planet, Rhinox hide, and doing a quick wash over all of these materials. It tints it just enough to create that definition, and then I can jump back in doing a real quick edge highlight. And I'm not actually edge highlighting all of these tiny details, but there are some that are more important than others. I like to do the leather bits because I find if I use an orangey brown as the quick highlight on leather, it really brings it to life and it reads as leather. The one thing you do want to be careful of while painting all of your little bullshit details is that you try not to make mistakes on that already completed armor. So if your material is touching that armor, go a little bit slower when you're drawing those brush strokes across so you can do your best not to mess up all that work you did. If you do make a mistake, just wait for it to dry, go back with your base color for the armor and touch it up. Next up is painting the metals, because every Space Marine has some form of metals on them, whether that's their Aquila or their bolter or whatever. But the thing is, they don't have a lot of this typically, and it is not the focus of your model. So I just make sure I put 2 base coats of my silver or my gold, and I try not to use 14 different metallics on the model. 1 or 2 is plenty. You may be catching on to the strategy we're using all throughout this to make these Space Marines look great, and that is to make sure everything else falls into the background compared to that power armor. And for this, I find that metals can do the same. Just use a regular black wash over your metals, maybe a dark brown wash over golds or coppers, and let them still show a bit of shine, but not be the belle of the ball when it comes to our final paint job. I found that my Space Marine started looking better when I spent 50 to 75% of my painting time just painting the armor and rushing through everything else. I do want to share a real fast way to paint fur, whether it's a detail like on this guy, a full cloak, or maybe it's an entire wolf. Paint the entire thing in a bone color or an ivory color. It needs to be really bright. From there, I take a sepia wash and I start at the bottom side or the underside, if it's an actual wolf, of that fur, and I pull this up towards the spine of the wolf or towards the upward part away from the edge of the fur on a cloak. Next, I just take an Agrax Earthshade, I repeat the last step, but I start this a little bit further up. So it looks like the fur is getting darker the further it goes up. Now, if you were on an actual wolf, you'd start this about at his rib cage and pull it up towards the spine. You can repeat this step as many times as you need to get as dark as you want to up to the top back of your wolf. Now onto the face and hair, and most Space Marines are wearing that cool helmet, so we don't have to worry about this part. You've already finished the head, but Space Wolves have such sweet faces that I wanted to paint one. You may notice that the face is all blue. Well, that's fine. We're just gonna roll with that and not repaint it, and I'm just gonna take some thin down red paint and I'm going to put it around his eyes, his nose, and his mouth. And this will give us an undertone of a natural warmth, so it will feel like skin in the next step. And for the skin, I'm only going to use 2 paints. Bugman's Glow, because it's a nice desaturated starting point for skin. It's not too peachy, it's not too pink. And then since I already had Screaming Skull on my palette from painting the fur, I'm going to use that to brighten that up as I go. For this, I'm just trying to outline the shapes of the face, his nose, his cheeks, his brow line, the little parts on his upper lip, and the jawline itself. I keep the most recessed areas, the areas where that red was sinking in, and the sides of his cheeks almost completely untouched. If they have a weird color underneath there, well, that's cool because human skin's got all sorts of weird color variations. So just leave it untouched and get this done really quickly. From there, I mix in a little more Screaming Skull and then a little more Screaming Skull over 2 or 3 more layers to get brighter and brighter. And I focus more and more on just those bright front areas, the forehead, the top of the brows, the upper parts of the cheeks, and his nose, and it will really draw your eye to the face quickly. I don't want to take very long painting here. I just base coat it a dark warm brown with Doombull brown, and then I mix in bits and bits of Tau light ochre. This is actually a really good color to do highlights of red or oranges with. I mix in a little bit and then a lot to give me a little bit of definition to each of the strands of hair. I have a confession to make with all of you today, and that is that I've never done a snow or wintry base on a model before. So no time like the present, I guess, since this is a Space Wolf. I just base coat and wash the base real quick. I'm not going to put a lot of time into that because I'm going to cover it largely with snow, and I'm going to try out this AK Interactive Terrain Snow today. This stuff actually works really, really good. One trick, though, is you want to make sure your brush is good and loaded with water before you stick it in here. It makes the stuff a little bit more pliable, a little bit easier to control, and then you can just dab it right onto the base, maybe move it around a little bit. I tried to make sure that I put it into the deepest cracks and crevices around the rock and the earth of my base, so it felt naturally. That's where the snow would collect. I decided not to overdo it with the snow on the base. Sometimes you think something looks good, so you just keep going, and then you turn around and it just looks like a cotton ball was placed on the base of your model. So, you know, a dab will do you. Now at this point, I'm about 2 hours into this paint job and everything is done. I can be done with this model, but it's at this point in every paint job that I like to take a good look around the model and look for things I want to change, I want to tweak, I want to maybe spend a little bit more time on. And for this model in particular, they have these black shoulder pads or black details on the Space Wolves in this Kill Team box, and I kind of wanted to bring in a little bit of that. I think the 2 blue shoulder pads looks a little bit boring, so I decided to just use a coat of contrast paint over one of them, and that looked like ass. So don't do that. Note to self, John, you said don't use contrast paint on Space Marines, and then you use contrast paint on a Space Marine's circular shoulder pad and it looked like shit. I'm an idiot. I ended up just taking pure black paint and thinning it way down and just kind of putting some thin coats over it so it was a nice even coverage. And then I went in with a gray edge highlight again, and I added a few little dots and scratches to bring a little life and interest to an otherwise boring black shoulder pad, and sometimes a little bit of texture and battle damage can go a long ways. The last thing I wanted to tweak was the fact that this guy is using a plasma pistol, and I did not paint the plasma coil, so You got to remedy that. Now, of course, there's a lot of fancy ways you can paint up plasma coils, but I want to get this done fast, so I'm just going to use some orange fluorescent paint. Now, this stuff is really thin, so you're going to want to do 3 or 4 coats of it on the plasma coil or anything you want glowing for it to get that full glow effect. I don't know about you, but some of the first models I painted in this hobby were Space Marines. And whenever I painted a Tyranid, a Necron, an Orc, anything like that, I felt pretty good about my progress, but whenever I painted a Space Marine, I felt like it looked like ass and made me frustrated and made me want to stop this hobby. But don't let these little stinkers get the best of you. It's not you, it's them. They are very tricky, but hopefully what I've learned to help me paint them over the years will help you a little bit as well. And the good news is, everything you learn from painting these sphere and cylinder covered assholes will make you a better painter for any miniature you tackle next. These days, I actually really enjoy painting Space Marines, and that's not a sentence I ever thought I would say 5 years ago, but just spending the time learning the tricks that really can make them look good has helped me enjoy painting them as well as so many other miniatures. And I'm curious, do you find value in breaking down tips on how I approach different models? Maybe there's a specific kind of Space Marine faction or chapter you'd like me to tackle. Maybe there's a different faction entirely you'd like me to dissect and walk through my process with you. If so, please let me know down in the comments section and I will pick one of those for a future video. A big thanks for hanging out with me today and painting up this little Space Wolf. I had a lot of fun and I appreciate your support, subscribing to the channel, picking up a Ninjon shirt, pre-ordering your deck of many colors. By the way, I've got a brand new website out there where I've got a whole page showcasing the art on the cards as well as all the artists so you can follow them and see what other awesome work they do. Pre-orders are still open. And finally, a big thanks to my patrons. Because of your support, I'm able to keep knocking out these videos and having so much fun bringing you along the way. If you want to support me with just a couple bucks a month and get some great rewards for doing so, check out the Patreon link below. And I'll be back before you know it with another new video. And just make sure that sometime between now and then, you find time in your day to slay the gray.